Let's see, Pedro Machado from Lisbon, I don't think is here yet. I haven't seen Carol is here. Giles is here. Peter has just arrived. So it looks like we just got 1 or 2 people coming, which means we don't wait any longer because we can't wait for the last person to arrive. So first of all, welcome everybody. We're glad you could join us for this discussion. This is the 4th, I guess, in the series of 6 that we have all together. And we've got sort of different constellations of people coming together for the different discussions, partly because we know it's just not possible to get so many people together over an extended period of time. So we figure if we can pack in an hour and a half here and there for different people, then we can hang on to you for that time. But we also know that life happens in the background, so we're very pleased that you could join us. And today we're looking at reaching, we'll say, goals or a vision for 2040. And you all received last week a sort of a description of this vision for 2040. And we're talking about how or what challenges we face and what actions we need to carry out to overcome those challenges in order to get there. So we've done some prioritizing of the challenges, and today we'll be looking at sort of finalizing that and then considering some actions that will help us get beyond those. So we're looking forward to getting your input on that. But we've also said for every workshop that we carry out, we also would like to share some input or maybe some outputs, I guess, from the project so that you can also learn from that. And what we have today is our, now we'll think of the name, Marisa, I'm not sure. Anyway, our regulation map, which my colleague Marisa is going to talk about. We've had discussions going back and forth about what it should be called, including in our last session. So this is why we're laughing a little bit. Maybe before we get there, though, it would be good just for the people that are here if we did a quick round of introductions so you all know who the other people are. And then I'll turn it over to Marisa after that. So I'll just go as I see it on my screen. Yannick, do you want to start?
Yes, my name is Yannick Busse. I'm from UITP. I'm working within the organization in the Mobility Governance Unit, and I'm also the project coordinator for Gecko.
Marisa, you're the next one I have.
Hello everybody, this is Marisa Meda from Fit Consulting, and I'm also part of the Gecko project.
Thank you. Giles?
So again, my name is Giles Bailey. I'm based in London. I'm part of the Travel Spirit Foundation, but also an independent consultant working in various projects across Europe.
Thank you. Peter, you're next.
Hi everyone. So yeah, I'm a senior project coordinator at Eurocities, which is a network of major European cities. Also managing the mobility team there. I'm mainly working on projects related to ITS and automation, but yeah, I'm also involved in many other projects related to active travel and planning and logistics, so a bit the wider menu of urban mobility. I try to invite my policy advisor as well, Thomas Lim, but so he unfortunately couldn't join. So I'm not the expert on let's say transport regulation at local level. Of course, I know a bit, so I will try to make myself as useful as I can be.
I can imagine your experience around automation might be something that would feed into this anyway, so not to worry. We'll take whatever we can get.
Thank you.
Velmoed, quick introduction.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Velmoed Nijmeijer. I work with Bolt. Bolt is a European-wide operator that provides different kinds of mobility services. We started as a ride-hailing business, but we've developed towards e-scooters and e-bikes as well in a sharing system. And we also do food delivery, which is a bit of a niche in that sense for us. I'm responsible for both the policy work in the Benelux region and for our rentals vertical in general, so everything that relates to e-bikes and e-scooters.
Thank you. Carol in the US.
I'm Carol Schweiger, president of Schweiger Consulting. I'm an independent consultant, and most of my work is in the public transport technology space, as well as mobility as a service.
Thank you. Pasquale.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pasquale Cancellara. I'm project manager at Polis, a network of cities and regions working on transport innovation, and we are partner of the Gecko project on communication activities.
Thank you. Caroline?
Yes, so good afternoon or good morning, everybody. I'm Caroline from Absiski, which is an innovation consulting company, and I'm also partner of the Gecko project.
Thank you. And Marusha?
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Marusha. I'm here on behalf of CORTA. We are a confederation of organizations in road transport enforcement, and we are part of the Gecko project.
Thank you. And last I think we have right now is Valerio.
Hello everyone, my name is Valerio Lubello. I'm a postdoctoral researcher in comparative public law, covering the fields of urban mobility and renewable energies. And we are part of the Gecko project.
Thank you. And with that, I think I would like to turn it straight over to Marisa, who is going to talk about the regulation tool that we've developed within the project and walk you through a little bit of that. Marisa, you should be able to take the screen now, I think.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So hello everybody, I'm Marisa from Fit Consulting, and in this presentation we will show you the compliance map, which is a tool that we developed to show the results of the assessment of regulatory frameworks dealing with the introduction or deployment of new mobility solutions all over the world. So here a list of what we are going to see. First of all, we will see the objective addressed by the compliance map. And then we will briefly see the methodological approach followed to perform this assessment. And finally, we will present the tool, which is already available on the Gecko website. So in Gecko, we perform the assessment of the capability of existing regulatory frameworks in enabling the implementation of innovative technologies and business models, while at the same time safeguarding adequate level of security, safety, data privacy, and social protection. So the compliance map will show these results. So now let's see how we performed this assessment. Let's clarify what we mean by regulatory frameworks in our project. We mean a set of binding and non-binding rules, but also initiatives, investments, and policies related to each city, region, or country, componing the regulatory environment with which the introduction of each mobility solution has to deal with. So what we did is, first of all, to identify 10 evaluation categories that are the main themes under which the regulatory frameworks are assessed. Then within each evaluation category, we identified a set of indicators to be selected according to the specific mobility innovation analyzed. Quantify these indicators, we relied both on the help of the Gecko stakeholder, which through the questionnaires identified the key aspects to be regulated and how they should be regulated, and assessed some excerpts from main regulations. So let me take this opportunity to thank you for that. But we also relied on existing databases, international databases such as OECD.stat, International Chamber of Commerce, and the World Economic Forum, and others. This approach allowed us to assess not only the specific regulation, but also the regulatory environment in which the mobility solution fits. For example, the World Economic Forum provides indexes like the legal framework's adaptability to digital business model, which necessarily influence the ability of a city or a country to enable new mobility services. Of course, in addition to this, we have also more specific indicators, more related to the specific innovation considered, such as if we consider connected automated vehicles. We also have indicators like the number of government-funded pilots or the level of safety required for pilots or road tests. So the next step was to understand within each evaluation category the weight of each indicator with respect to the others. We did a round of interviews with the Gecko stakeholders. Thank you again for that. And who helped us to assign these weights. So, for example, if we consider the data aspect, is it more important the cybersecurity aspect or the data management? And is it the same if we consider mobility as a service? So by performing this process for all of the evaluation category, we have been able to define an overall index, which we call the regulation compliance, that is displayed on the compliance map. So now let's see the main features provided by the compliance map. But let's first of all look at the database feeding the compliance map. We analyzed more than 220 regulations. We covered regulatory frameworks from all of the macro areas in the world. And on the right side, you can see the distribution of regulatory frameworks by mobility solution. So the compliance map, which is a temporary name, I would say, is a regulatory and supportive tool for a practical synthesis of the different regulatory schemes, showing the similarities and differences of these regulatory schemes, shares the common goal of enabling these new mobility technologies or innovations. So the functionalities, the information that the compliance map provide can be clusterized in three functionalities. The first one is the regulation compliance, which is representative of the effectiveness of each city or country in regulating the different aspects needed to adopt the new mobility solutions. Then we have the regulation readiness, which combines the regulation compliance together with the different combination of penetration of each mobility solution. And finally, we have also a qualitative overview of the main entrance barriers that each mobility solution has to face for the entrance in the market. But now let's see directly at the tool, which is already, can you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Which is already available on the Gecko website. So here you will see a brief description of the three functionalities, and here the main content of the competence map. The first functionalities, which is the regulation compliance, is presented by making reference to two levels, which are country level and city level. Okay. And so here what you can do is to select, choose to see the regulation compliance as an overall index, or also one of its components. So you see that the evaluation of its component is different with respect to the overall index. Then you can also select the mobility solution to be displayed, and you can also hover your mouse on a country or a city, and you will see a window that will appear showing some information regarding the name of the country or the city, the score obtained by the assessment, which refers to the entire C or one of its components, the one that you selected on the right. A brief description on the regulatory approach, and the name of the main regulatory text analyzed to assess the regulatory framework. And here you can click to be sent to the main regulatory text consulted, which I don't know why it takes so long to open, but it worked. Okay. And in general, a high value or a darker color of the regulation compliance index or one of its components means that the regulatory framework related to that country or that city is more effective in regulating that aspect of the introduction or deployment of the mobility innovation. Then we have the other functionality, which is the regulatory readiness, which, as I said, provides an holistic assessment of the level of readiness of each country to accommodate the introduction of different level of penetrations of the mobility innovation that we analyzed. So you can use these sliders to modify the different assets of penetration of this mobility solution. So, for example, if I increase the level of penetration of the drones and last mile delivery, you can see that, for example, Tanzania is getting fuchsia, pinker, because here, for example, the social evolution category is selected, and it is colored in pink because Tanzania, for example, is using drones to deliver medical supplies in rural areas. So you can also select the combination that you prefer. of each mobility innovation, and you will see that the map automatically update the values. Then the third functionality is related to barriers, entrance barriers that hinder the introduction or penetration in the market. So here the barriers are categorized by some clusters, which are political, economical, social, technological, legal, and environmental. And here you see a preview of the description of the barriers. If you want to see the entire text, you can select the theme you are interested in, and you will see the entire description. And also here you can select the mobility innovation to be shown. And if you hover your mouse on the description, you will see solutions and best practices to overcome the barriers if available. And finally, you will find a brief guideline to use the compliance map, or also a long version, which also provides some screenshots to help us navigate the contents provided by the compliance map. So it's all from my side. I don't know is there any question?
Thanks, Marisa. Does anybody have any questions for Marisa about the tool? You're also welcome to, as she said, it's on a website, on the Gecko website already, so you can go there and play with it if you want to. Maybe not right now, but we'll give you the link so that you can check it out.
I have maybe one question.
Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, I don't know in Zoom where to find the raise your hand button, but yeah, it's an impressive piece of work, and yeah, collecting and analyzing all these, let's say, regulatory frameworks must have been an enormous task. But from the perspective of yeah, connected and automated mobility, for example, I know for one of the projects I'm involved in, the SHOW project, we also recently did comparative analysis of legislative frameworks at national level for deployment of automated vehicles, and it's all changing enormously fast. And my question would be, and yeah, maybe you're very much aware of this, like how can you keep something that is so dynamic? How can you keep that up to date?
Yeah, we are internally discussing how to keep updated the tool, and also update the contents also after the end of the project. In any case, the assessment that have been done and that it's shown on the compliance map is partly comes from an human evaluation, which is from a stakeholder, but also from a Gecko partner, and it also relies on existing database. So it will all depend on who will keep it alive and will update the database.
Yeah, it's a fair question though. we've done, I mean, Marisa and everybody else has put in so much work into gathering these in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah, but almost all of the evaluation is now automated. So there's just a little part which requires a stakeholder or a partner to read the regulatory text and assess some aspects.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
And thank you, Marisa. Does anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, sorry, I did have one. I was raising my hand.
Sorry, Giles, I don't see it strangely, but go ahead.
Just following on from that, in countries where some of the regulations may be regionally or provincially based or something along those lines, do you capture those variations? Because often that can be quite a part of the confusion and the fact that the nation doesn't, so to speak, regulate that particular issue.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I get the question. Are you referring to the fact that there could be a regional level that is not city level, local level, neither a country level, or?
Yes. So in effect, so many of these regulations often come down to political divisions within the country, and just trying to understand. And do you capture those subtleties in the database?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, yes, I know. Some of the regional aspects have been put in the city level or regional or country level, just because the Tableau, which is the software that embed our information, do not provide for all of the countries the regional frame, let's say, but they have been taken into account or case by case or at city level or regional level.
That address the question, Giles? It's fair enough with the large, and you probably saw the same as I did, that regulation was a provincial one in Canada as opposed to a local or a national one. So that is probably an example of just what you were talking about.
Yes, and I mean, I realize it's very difficult, but yeah, it's kind of an inevitable outcome of often trying to figure out where the power actually lies for a particular issue. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Then I think we should move on to get to sort of the meat of what we're going to be talking about today. Marisa, do you want to give up the hosting, and Yannick, you want to take it for yourself?
Yes.
Have you got the screen now, Yannick?
I have the screen now. Yes, you should be able to see it.
Yeah, it's just arriving for me anyway.
Just putting it on full screen. There you go. Okay. So I'll give some background context to the workshop and what we'll be doing for today. This work is fitting into a document which we are producing at the moment, which is one of the final results of the project. And this is something we're looking at, which is which we've called at the moment, it's the Adaptive Regulation Roadmap 2040. So we're looking at this forward-looking and future horizon of the year 2040. And the idea is also to build this roadmap document. And we're mainly looking at what are the various challenges and what are the various actions that we would like to have in this document to build this basically an implementation plan to what we want to do is the ultimate aim is to devise adaptive and anticipatory regulatory approaches and also to be able to identify new regulatory frameworks. And so we have, and what we're building in this document is these various challenges and actions, and we'll come to this also in this workshop. And also the central aim of this document, basically of this roadmap, will then be how can we foster, how can we enable, how can we have better regulation of new mobility? So that is the ultimate aim of the roadmap. It's not exactly the implementation of the solutions itself, but how can we have the regulation in place, which is adaptive, anticipatory, to then accommodate these new mobility going into the future. So that's the ultimate aim of the roadmap and what we're doing. As I said, this is based on a number of steps. So put simply, we have 3 steps here. So we have where are we now at the moment? So this is a description of what we've been doing in the project so far. So we have made a number of project reports already. And from those project reports, we have identified a number of challenges to meet the ultimate aim of the roadmap. And these challenges is something we'll be discussing today. And it was also something that was in the stakeholder survey, which some of you might have also filled in. Where do we want to go? So this is the what we've called at the moment the Gecko Vision 2040. I'll come to this also in the next slide. And ultimately, how can we get there? So what are the actions needed so that we can reach to this ultimate aim? And that's something very important we're discussing today. So the vision, to give an idea of where we ultimately want to achieve by having adaptive and anticipatory regulation. This is something that we set out. It follows the structure, it follows the main lines of the EU Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy. So the 3 main themes there of making all transport modes more sustainable, making sustainable alternatives widely available in a multimodal transport system, and putting in place the right incentives to drive the transition to zero emission mobility. So we took that as the main frame of this vision, and then we discussed on a project level what are the solutions, what do we need to put in place to reach to the EU strategy and also to this Gecko vision. And we did that based on discussions from the various partners in the project, but also referencing the European Commission, the International Transport Forum, and also reports from Arthur D. Little also. Then that takes us to the challenges and actions. So the starting point for this, as I said, these are important steps in this roadmap document. The starting point was the work that we have done already in the Gecko project, and particularly the project reports, where also yourselves as stakeholders in the project, you have also contributed to. So you could also directly be able to find some of the contributions, the discussions that we had in various stakeholder workshops, in the first one in London, the second one which took place online. This has been forwarded into the deliverables, and this is now coming again in these final reports, these final documents which we're making for the project. So we were able to assess those challenges, and we were able to put them into the survey, the stakeholder survey, which we have sent out. And we received 46 responses to this. And we asked in that survey, which you can see the question on the right-hand side, we asked stakeholders to prioritize those challenges into various categories of what must be addressed immediately, what should be addressed in the medium term, what is not a priority, and what is an ongoing tension, something that we will just have to live with, so to say. And for today, then, this morning, we already had a workshop where we were addressing the challenges, and we did quite a substantial part of the work on these challenges already. We have somewhere we would like to pick up with you and continue that work. And another important part is also we would like to discuss what are the actions also that can correspond to some of these challenges. So I'll stop there, and then we can go next to the Miro board. We'll be working on these challenges and actions. So I'll hand over to you again, Bonnie.
Okay. And there we go. So I'll just take over from where Yannick left off. What you can see here, and I've also put the link into the chat, so you can happily go into this and click around yourself. Maybe I'll just step back first and give you the overview of what we have. This is the collection of the challenges that were identified in the, and that were fed into the survey that I think most of you responded to. And we've ended up with, I think, about 15 that seem to be sort of on the higher priority side. You don't need to worry about the colors. This is something that we were dealing with this morning in our first workshop round, and we're doing this a little bit in the format of, we'll call it like a World Cafe, in that you're picking up the information that somebody else has worked on, and we're taking the next step and building on that with you. So this is what your role is here. So the colors have already been addressed. The one thing that's kind of interesting here, and I'll zoom in, is you can see that we have the columns, so must be addressed immediately, medium term, not a priority, and this ongoing tension. These are the columns, as Yannick mentioned, and as they appeared in the survey that you completed. And what we've done here now is to try and create consolidated priorities, because we analyzed the surveys by the different stakeholder groups that we have, which is the public sector, the private sector, and what we've called other influencers. And that can be associations or academics, or sometimes consultants or NGOs, sort of maybe who are one step removed from the direct involvement. And so with those three different categories, it was interesting to see that there were, for example, sometimes differences between where they placed them in the priority list. And with the colored ones, we were quite fine, but we had actually several challenges that were identified, and maybe I'll even make this bigger. The ones that were black were they had quite significant differences in where they were placed. So for example, one group in general said that it must be addressed immediately, and another group said it's a tension that we just have to live with. And so we sort of left these ones out. I'll leave the color of this one as well aside, but what we have right now are these, the three that were difficult to place, we'll say, and this one, which we'll just add to the list, don't worry about the colors. And so the first we have basically two jobs to do today, we hope, through discussion with you. What we would like to do is to place these last four challenges that were identified, and from what we've got so far, we're assuming that will be in the to be addressed immediately or the medium term, but it could also be not a priority. So we're happy to have your input on this to decide where to place those. And more importantly, where we'd like to spend more time if we could, is to get your thoughts and ideas on what actions would need to be carried out in order to address these challenges, and particularly the top priority ones. So we'll give you just a moment to look at these. You've seen them once in the survey, but I know that was a while ago. So I've tried to explain sort of what the context of this is with the priorities among the stakeholders. I'll just give you maybe two more pieces of information if I zoom out, and you can see, just for reference, we have the 2040 vision scenario, or 2040 vision, that we sent to you last week. If you'd like to reference it, it's just there to be seen. And we got some interesting inputs from the stakeholders this morning. We don't really want to go into this, I would say, right now, but we have it here for your reference in case you'd like to take a look. It's certainly freely available. And these are duplicates of some of the sticky notes that are here, with next to these comments that came out of the discussion this morning. So the group was placing them, but at the same time, there were various things that they felt the need to comment on, or that were unclear, or there were questions. And so don't worry if you move things around, it happens sometimes. I've done it too. So this is the big overview, and we'll just give you maybe 2 or 3 minutes, if that's okay. And I'll zoom in close for those of you who are just looking on my screen. I can see there are lots of people sort of zooming around who have gone to the link, and that's super. But if you would like, I'm just going to leave this open here. I hope it's big enough for you to see then. So these are the challenges that have already been placed. These are the ones that still need to be placed. And just for a time reference, we're hoping we can do this within about 10 minutes and then push on towards some of the actions. So I'll stop talking so you can read for a couple of minutes. And questions in the chat or out loud, if you have any, feel free.
I maybe have a question related to sticky note number 19,
Okay.
the yellow one.
Yes.
I'm not sure I completely understand it. So there's, it says the testing of different mobility technologies requires different regulatory approaches. For me, that sounds very obvious. Is it really saying what it's meant to be saying?
Yeah. Sometimes I'll take the first interpretation and maybe one of my colleagues can add if I'm misinterpreting, but it probably is as obvious as it seems, but it creates it does create challenges. It's sounding really obvious.
My assumption is you cannot create one regulatory approach for all new mobility services. There will always have to be.
True. But it's actually, it's the testing of different mobility technologies.
And and that's the next level of misunderstanding, potential misunderstanding.
Yeah.
So it's about testing, but even there, in my opinion, it doesn't make any difference if it's about testing or actually applying it.
Applying it comes out the same. Maybe I'll ask Yannick or Marisa. I'm not sure who was dealing with that one in particular, but I'm a little bit lost as well when you said, Peter, to be honest. It does seem to be stating the obvious.
Yeah.
Any takers?
The maybe not for that one, but I feel the same way about number 4.
Okay.
It's like, sure, new mobility solutions, you know, may meet the needs of some end user groups and not others. That's absolutely true. But what does that have to do with sort of the regulatory environment? I mean,
Yeah, that one I'm fairly certain was a question of equity.
Okay.
Yeah, then it makes more sense then, doesn't it?
It makes much more sense now.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I was able to answer Carol's question, but Peter, you stumped me.
My understanding is that it's the person who came up with this probably wanted to say that can there not be one, let's say, testing framework for all kinds of new mobility services? But I
And
think
the
that's
answer is
just
no.
not. Yeah, I think that's just not possible.
That it's stating the obvious.
Yeah, yeah.
Does anybody have any counter comments to this?
Yes.
Caroline?
Yes, actually, maybe it's wrong, what I will say, but I think that the regulatory approach or process will not be the same depending on what we are talking about. For example, if we consider a very disruptive infrastructure for which nothing exists, such like Hyperloop or air taxis, for example, I think that's not the same thing as deploying e-scooters.
Yeah, and that's understood.
I think that's Peter's point, though, that it's rather obvious, and it simply is not possible. Or,
yeah.
I mean, as a challenge, then it sort of seems like what I hear from you, Peter, is this would be an ongoing tension. We just have to live with it. That's
Yeah. For me, it's something we will always continue to have in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It sounds, as you say, quite simple when you say that, but I know when we talk about trying to develop a framework of some sort, that it's something that can be at a large enough scale that new forms can be fit into that somehow. So I don't know if there's anything that's general enough at that or at that high level, or if you've always got different aspects.
The only thing I could say about that, and maybe that's what it kind of refers to, is that cities could provide really, let's say, dedicated testing grounds for all kinds of new mobility services. Let's say the famous sandbox approach. And maybe it relates to that. Maybe it was intended like that. But ideally, cities should have such an area where there can be a very wide range of testing.
Yeah. I think it can relate also to the fact that we have to comply with fast evolving innovations, and somehow we have to define some kind of automated process in order to deal with it. So different regulatory approaches according to the mobility innovations we are dealing with. So maybe this statement was in the sense of this too.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a fair question, though, and I think sort of at the philosophical level, is there anything that stands above all new innovation? I mean, I suppose your general principles or priorities as a city around sustainability or social equity or something like that would always stand above, but that's not new to new mobility, I suppose.
Yeah. And they would always, or new mobility services would always be measured against those. And you cannot have a permanent situation where there's a regulation in place that will always allow for any new type of mobility service to come in. So it will always, that's why I think it's something that's a tension that will continue to exist.
Yeah. which I think is a fair enough point. And so it's placed over there. Then we've put it. You've placed the first one for us.
We solved it.
Thank you. We just moved it out of the way. What about the other three that we still have here? This new mobility solutions may meet the needs of some end users, or really what we're saying is they won't be accessible to some potentially for various reasons. And this being, I'm fairly certain this is a social equity issue that was intended for this. And I can say that in general, it was interesting, I'll say the other sector, so the academics, associations, and so on, place this as a must be addressed immediately. And I think most of the private side said, that's just the way it is. So it went off on the other side. And then, so our question to you right then is, what do you do with this, seeing it as an equity issue? Can we place it somewhere?
It's almost an ongoing struggle, but it definitely still needs to be addressed. So I don't know that it belongs in that column all the way over to the right.
Yeah.
Addressing it immediately, I don't want to say that that's impossible, but I think it's something that takes a long time. So maybe it's more medium term.
If we want to take a compromise position, we can drop it on the line between them. We've done that with a couple of other ones before. So, and your point is a fair one. And we had something similar that somebody made to one of the other ones, saying it needs to be addressed on an ongoing basis, but that doesn't mean that it's just there and we can't, that it can't be fixed. It must be fixed,
right?
But it is ongoing. So it almost says there's a category missing here. So,
yeah.
Although, to be the devil's advocate here.
Go ahead, Peter.
So also thinking from, of course, I mainly represent cities, but I can understand the perspective of companies that develop these technologies and new mobility services and so on. For example, if you develop e-scooters and you can see there's a broad category of users that are very happy with them. And you know that for certain types of users, they will never be an accessible or easy to use mode of transport. Is it fair to regard it as a non-accessible mode of transport? If it serves a certain audience, why not
fair
allow
enough.
it?
Yeah, maybe because this is a question that I'm looking at the way it's worded as well. If this is a question of, so if somebody uses a wheelchair, maybe they don't use an e-scooter. Or the question, because there's this accessibility thing, it could be that, well, why are e-scooters not made available in, say, poor neighborhoods? Then those are the equity components of it. But what I would do then is I'll ask maybe Yannick or Marisa to put a comment on that. We've been adding comments. This is what all the stuff in the yellow on the right side was. Adding comments to say things that need to be taken into account. So it's a fair point, Peter. It's not something for everybody. Maybe it does need to be taken into account. Well, yeah. Carol, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I have also another perspective. I don't know whether this is appropriate or not, but there's a lot of discussion lately about regulations that create inequity as well. Like during the pandemic, they're handing out less parking tickets because the people who really need to get to work have only been able to drive, and you're penalizing a certain segment of the population. So that's actually another way of looking at the equity issue, is that the regulation itself can create inequities, as well as people not being able to use those modes like Peter was mentioning.
Yeah.
If I could add something as well.
Yeah, Giles.
I'm not on mute. I think it's also an issue of where innovators think about new mobility innovation. And frankly, if all of the innovation is for one segment of the population, because they're wealthier or live in certain areas or have certain dispositions, and nobody else gets any innovation, I think this becomes an extremely big problem. So I'd almost say it has to be looked at all times, that we're spreading out the innovation across a range of opportunities.
Yeah.
And again, if you build a tram network, it's the classic thing of, is it covering a range of communities in your city who can all access the tram? Or that's one way of looking at positive accessibility or inclusion, as opposed to literally you're only letting certain people on because they're the most interesting ones.
Yep. Thank you for that. I'm gonna maybe take that and say it kind of ends up in the must be addressed immediately and on an ongoing basis is what that comes down to, I think, assuming that we're looking at this as from the equity perspective, as the understanding was. Okay, I'm just watching the time and seeing we've got a couple more.
If I may make a brief suggestion there, I think from an operator's perspective, I think this especially looking at e-scooters and e-bikes in the sharing system, I think operators are generally looking more and more towards how can we make this service accessible for a wider group of people, because after all, I mean, it benefits the citizens, the users, but also the company itself, and that's where I expect in the coming years to see more and more partnerships, for example, with public transport operators, where you get interesting deals for public transport subscription holders, where they can use these kind of services for a lower fee, which makes it attractive to a much wider group of people. And I think also being these kind of services becoming more and more available in areas a bit outside of the city center. It's slowly spreading. It takes a bit of time, because the service needs to kind of kick off and people need to get to know it, and it needs to mature in that sense. But I do think that the development is there, and what I've seen so far is that it can sometimes be very helpful as well if cities help operators to get in touch with the right parties in the city, because it's not always easy to find the right access. So for example, we've had occasions where we were trying to get in touch with the right people at a public transport operator, a large one, and then if cities already have the right context and can make that match, it can just sometimes go a long way in creating solutions for a much wider group of citizens.
To make the service then accessible to a larger group.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Yeah, it's maybe a related concept, but lately there's also been a lot of talking about, let's say, funding transport users directly. So instead of rather putting a lot of money into transport modes, different transport modes and operators, you could also consider really funding users directly so they can decide on which service they think is the most appropriate for them.
You have a mobility budget of sorts,
the mobility budget. Of course, I see you already have a lot of ideas on your board, so I don't want to complicate.
Okay,
but
I sort of thought you were going actually in the direction of the next one I was looking at, which is number 7 here. And again, we had quite a range in this the first time around. The differing goals between the public and the private sector. And this could also come a little bit back to what Velmut is saying. So maybe you have, or maybe it's a little bit of a contradiction to what you're saying. You're saying we're offering a service and this public sector is saying, how does this fit in? And obviously as a private company, part of your goal is to make some money. And so maybe the trust or the different aspirations of the two parties could cause challenges. And the question is that something you need to try and address, or is that just a tension that is there? That's really what it comes down to when we're placing this right now.
Yeah.
Any takers? Where would you put this? This is a big question. Can it be addressed?
For me, number 7 is something that we will always continue to have.
Yep, I'm just going to go over and take a quick look here. This was the comment that we had from somebody else when we talked about this morning. There are models that can help drive cooperation. So this is the one thing, but it seems to be, Peter, this is something that just is there.
Yeah, yeah. And I know that as a city, you can define various legal, contractual, regulatory, let's say, approaches to deal with new types of mobility services, but it will always have to be adapted to future mobility services that will come into the market. So you can develop such culture, I would say, as a city, to be adaptive and also to be, let's say, critical but accommodating at the same time for new types of mobility services. But we also don't know what the future will bring. We have seen so many new mobility services coming up in recent years that we never had forecasted in the past.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's something static. It's something
No, it's interesting. You kind of, from what it was saying, it seems like we're just missing a category that says it needs to be addressed now and on an ongoing basis. And this idea of culture, which comes up, I think, like what kind of culture you have in your city, in the administration, how you work, how flexible you are, how your communication is, what level of trust you have, all of those things would seem to fit into that. Okay. Yep. So we're talking about it, then it belongs to, for me, what you've said is it's in the first category, it must be addressed, and again, now and on an ongoing basis. I'm going to push you just because we're already behind our time and maybe set unrealistic goals.
No. You got
what
my
are the
comment.
22 new mobility providers are not included in the creation of regulations that directly affect their products? And maybe I'll start with you, Vamut, because you're on that side. Nobody asks you where you should be able to park your scooters or what they need for lights or batteries or that sort of thing, but they set these rules.
That depends, though, on the city and the country, really. And we see cities that have a very inclusive, a very open approach, and we see cities that have a more closed approach. Yeah, so I wouldn't necessarily say that I recognize this. I do recognize that in some cases it is difficult as an operator to get in touch with the city and to talk about, you know, what could this look like in your city. And at the same time, I also understand that sometimes there just isn't enough space to speak to the private market and to each individual operator. What I do see is that operators from different sectors tend to cooperate in different countries on a more regular basis. And that seems to be a model that works well, where you have a trade association of for example, e-scooter operators in country X, Y, or Z. And that really enables more regular dialogue with both local cities and local governments. So, yeah.
Okay, I have to mute myself. Sorry for that.
The standard work at home stuff, yeah.
Yeah, my dog also has an opinion on this.
So Vamut, it's interesting, it's as these, as new mobility solutions are sort of becoming more established, they're creating maybe systems that also exist for old mobility. I mean, public transport associations exist as well. There's, at least in Germany, there's a car sharing association. So that's being developed also for new mobility. So it's interesting, then maybe it's not that you as a provider need to talk to everybody, but the association can deal with cities, or the association deals with the association of cities. So you're working at a higher level.
For example, and of course, I mean, it is good, I think, that the voice of new providers is heard generally, because we see that in some cases there's still a lot of things that cities do not know about the way these services work, or what it can offer, also in terms of data sharing or other capabilities, and that is logical because the industry is developing so rapidly. But if there's no opportunity to have a dialogue, no one will ever know, right? So I think there's in that sense an interest for the voices to be heard. But yeah, I understand the constraints on both sides.
From the other side as well. So if we had to place this, where would you put it now? I'll put this out to the room. If anybody wants to say anything, we're also welcoming words from Peter's dog. Short term, medium term. It sounds like from what Valmut is saying, it certainly can be addressed. And it's interesting. It's making me think that all of these ones that are black came into different categories because maybe we were lacking the category in our question that said now and forever, basically. So it sounds like it would fit somewhere in here as well, either in this immediate or midterm. I'm going to say we'll place it right there now because we need to force you on to the next step, which is what we really need to get to as well. The discussion is always interesting, but we'll certainly be referring back to this. When we're thinking now about the next column we're in is called actions. So if you're looking at these things, sort of the ones that you've discussed and the other ones as well, I've got colleagues that are happy to type in the background, or you can type yourself if you want to, but the question is how to overcome. And some of the stuff that I've heard already say from Peter is it's really, we're talking on a large scale about communication, trust, culture in the city, which are, and this is if we look at number 6, which was placed here this morning, this idea of the large scale shift away from the private car ownership, and we're talking about major culture shifts in general to get away from car focus to all of these other, which are now new modes. What do you see for actions? I mean, actually one I've even heard from Valmut, I would say, is the creation of associations of new mobility users to consolidate your voices that way as well. So I could say, I would certainly want to add that. I'm assuming somebody's going to type.
And maybe also sharing of best practices of cities that have, or national regulators that have found an effective way to deal with a larger group of stakeholders. There's continuous innovation on that side as well, I believe, on how best to involve all these different modes and perspectives.
Yeah. What I think we're lacking is a kind of neutral platform at European level. And so we know with different city networks and industrial associations and so on, we each have, let's say, different conversations, ongoing conversations, but it's all a bit fragmented for the moment. Like within the smart cities marketplace, there's new mobility services action cluster initiative, and that's actually something that Eurocity set up ages ago. But it's really hard to keep people committed to that. But to have such a neutral platform at European level, to have an exchange of opinions, to better understand each other's needs and expectations, that could be useful. But I think it's very important. It's really something neutral. It's not controlled by one organization. It's something in between public and private. Because I think we and probably several people within this meeting and in the previous meetings, we're having all these separate dialogues with different stakeholders, and probably there's a lot of duplication going on in terms of gathering ideas and best practices and designing regulatory approaches and so on. Well, I know we do that within our network, within Eurocities. We had a lot of discussions with micromobility operators, and then we came up with studies and reports and recommendations. I'm sure that's the same on the side of UITP or Polis. But it could be easier if you had this one neutral platform to do that. Of course, who will manage that? Who will set it up? Who will fund it? That's another question.
Peter, I sort of am thinking about an analogy to what you're saying, and it's that sticky note about standards, and it's under the medium term. That's another situation. It's sort of that, yeah, you're pointing to it right now, the lack of technical standards. And there we have several different communities developing the underlying standards so that you can build appropriate regulations. But there are groups at the international level, like ISO, for example, that exist that I think are trying to take a lot of diverse standards and come up with something, come up with one standard that works across, whether it's the international community or just the EU community or just the US. I see that as kind of analogous to what you're saying.
Yep. And that's indeed a very relevant analogy, but let's say from our work at Eurocities on standards in general, not only in mobility, we know that it's the way these standards working groups function, they're very often private sector driven. And let's say they also need to protect certain commercial interests. As cities, we always, let's say, push for open standards. But let's say these standardization bodies for us are not always very neutral either. And for cities, it's a bit challenging to be involved in all those working groups. It requires a lot of expertise. And regulation is also a bit softer, I would say. But definitely your analogy, yeah, it makes sense.
I was just going to add as well that I think it's really important that cities, particularly the medium to larger cities, have a structured way of engaging innovation mobility. Because there's no, I mean, although we often talk a lot about e-scooters, there's no reason to expect that there won't be more innovation coming forward because there's innovation everywhere, you know, not just in mobility. So if the innovators come to the city and the city has no way of structuring the conversation or how you engage with me, or do we have a sandbox or even an association, I think it just becomes very, very difficult for the city to react, but also for the innovators to react. So almost standardizing that engagement process, saying there are certain people or a body or a part of the organization or somebody allows you to have the conversation that allows you to get to a point where something can be trialed and developed on a city-by-city basis, probably, or at least a region-by-region basis, is certainly a good action going forward.
It sounds like, yeah, guidance or guidelines for cities. Is that what you're talking about, Giles?
More than guidelines, I think it's actually the structure within the city of who is going to be in charge of this. How will you deal with that entrepreneur who knocks on the door or sends an email and says they want to try it? And almost going back to the points we were talking about before.
Yeah.
Unless you have that structure, you're in building the tension because they'll try and do something and you have no way of actually even having a proper conversation with them. And clearly we're just going to get chaos because they might try and do it anyways.
Yeah.
Bonnie, we have some post-its written below the table.
What I've got on the screen, yeah.
Yes, and we just need to see also where to put them, if these are immediate actions to be addressed or medium term.
Or are these addressing, maybe the question is, do they link to particular ones of the challenges that we've identified?
So I'll start by reading one out maybe. So we had already sharing of best practice by regulators on how to deal with new mobility solutions. So would anyone say that this is something to be done immediately, or this is something that can happen over a medium term?
Any takers? I'm just trying to see, or if anybody can say what it links to. I know it was sort of coming out of our discussion.
I mean, it almost goes in the middle. You know, like we were saying, it's maybe not an immediate term.
Yeah.
But because you're going to build these things over time, you're going to be looking at best practices, you know, wherever you can.
Yeah. I have to say, this comes back so often really to just basic, and it was part of the discussion we had for our podcast recording, Carol, this just coming back to some real basics of structures that you have, knowing what you want to do, communication. It's all part of that same thing, or basically what we're talking about is establishing a resilient city. It's really what we're talking about on the broad scale. That enables these new things to be incorporated into it. I mean, in mobility, there are novelties in mobility in the same as there are in any other aspect of a city. And how do you work through that process? And I would say, like the one just below that, Yannick, this with the structured, standardized way to engage with innovative mobility is sort of the same thing. Again, setting up those standards, frameworks that you can work within. The one next to it is referring to number 8. I would say that seems to be sort of going along the same direction. It almost sounds like we've got one answer to deal with all of our different questions. Can that be? It's super interesting if it is.
I have another one.
Okay, good, Peter.
And
go ahead.
It's a very obvious one, and we've all been working on the topic, but it's not addressed yet.
Yeah.
It's sustainable urban mobility plans, so many cities have such a plan, and it really sets a framework. It sets the long-term objectives. I would say as an action that any provider of new mobility services would need to compare its service against a SUMP that is in place in a certain city.
Yeah.
If I were a new mobility service provider, before really developing my service in a city, I would have a look at the sustainable urban mobility plan to say, okay, what are the long-term objectives? Because if you see that your service is not meeting, let's say, environmental or inclusive criteria or safety criteria, then of course you can ask yourself some critical questions. So I would say that's a very obvious one again, but I see it's not addressed yet.
It's obvious and it's not stated. I'm glad to hear it, because we have in fact, we've added, because of a lot of the changes around Corona and so on within the project, we have in fact added an extra deliverable, which is SUMP governance and regulation. So we're creating an SUMP, what are they called? What are they, the
topic guidelines or practitioners briefing.
Practitioners briefing, one of those. Anyway, that's one of our next and final products. Will also be creating something for that. So I'm glad to hear you say that as well.
So it's already happening.
Yeah, I mean, that's, at least we'll be putting together some guidelines of how to incorporate those. So, but I'm glad to hear you saying the same thing. And I know, Carol, I think it was our discussion with Lewis as well. And he was saying exactly that. He works in Singapore, but was talking about his first starting of car sharing in China. And he said, he's talking to the government saying, okay, what do you need? And, you know, what direction are you going in? And then saying, this is how I can meet your needs. As opposed to saying, I've got a cool new service. You know, trying to sell it that way, but to directly point out. So whether it's the SUMP or whatever guidelines towards sustainability or health or whatever it is, urban planning, that the provider addresses those needs directly.
Yeah.
If I could make one other quick comment on the point you just made, Bonnie.
Yeah,
it is interesting that a lot of the entrepreneurs won't be from the transport world. So they won't actually know even what a sump is in the starting point.
Yep. Yeah.
Yep.
Almost then tie them
observation.
back to great idea, but how does it fit in the context? And
Yeah.
we might say that is obvious because we're in the industry, but a lot of people coming into the industry won't really understand that. They just want to
Yep.
try their idea.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
no, that's a really good point. But sometimes you do need to come back and address the what you would or you or I would call the obvious. How does this fit? Yeah. This neutral, maybe European, you've said here, platform, I think is interesting too. And I know this was part of the discussion. Giles, you were there, I know, in our workshop in London, the only face-to-face one we were able to hold. And I remember sort of having part of this discussion as well about, do you need something in between, sort of the moderating role between the city and the private sector because of the trust to a certain extent? Or an advisor really to cities. Is that kind of what you're talking about with this neutral platform? I think that was Peter's point there.
Yeah.
I don't
I
think,
think it's.
yeah, I
Yeah,
don't
sorry.
think necessarily, sorry, go ahead, Peter.
Yeah. Yeah. So the way I see this neutral platform, so we often hear that, yeah, the commercial sector is looking, yeah, for ways to better communicate with cities, and cities want, in the other direction, want to have a better understanding of what companies want to develop. But it's quite a delicate exercise, of course. Also, yeah, you have different stakeholders with different strategic interests at European level. So for me, this neutral aspect is quite important, and it almost implies indeed that you have a neutral moderator. Of course, if you would take this action to the Commission and say, this is what we need, I'm not sure they would be enthusiastic and say, oh yes, we have some money and we will take on this role and we will operate this. So probably they will get back to you and say, okay, but you might consider embedding this in one of the many existing initiatives. But for me, yeah, this neutral character is super important. And not only between public and private, also between, yeah, different public stakeholders as well. They might have very different interests.
Fair enough. I mean, there's also the question of maybe public transport feeling a bit threatened by new services coming in. And we've taken as a basic assumption in Gecko that public transport is sort of the backbone, and new mobility services need to support and work around that as opposed to replacing it. But yeah, certainly there could be different views on that. Giles, you were going to say something though, and then I think maybe Carol was going to, or maybe I misinterpreted, but.
I'm going to have to go relatively shortly as well. So very briefly, again, many cities have an innovation lab, which I think in effect deal with the point that Peter was making as a not completely neutral, but at least a slightly more independent way of engaging many of these issues. That said, I don't think that's the only way. If you can structure your core business units that they can just deal with innovation in the core government, fair enough. But I wouldn't suggest it always has to be like a foundation or a completely separate body, because I think that's just creating a layer of bureaucracy that might not be always required.
And certainly it's the interest of the city that needs to come first. We're talking about whatever it is that's happening in the city is for the citizens. So that needs to be the key interest that we're playing into or for. That's who the regulations are for, or to serve a city and its citizens. I'm just questioning though, Giles, you say many cities have an innovation lab. I would say many forward-thinking cities, or some forward-thinking cities, some larger forward-thinking cities, but I'm guessing the smaller cities and even many large ones, I think many is probably an overstatement for innovation labs. Just
Perhaps
my
I was
guess.
being a little overambitious, but yeah, many of the forward-thinking ones then.
Yeah. And I guess the thing is, so how do you move forward if you don't have that is the question. Or do you have to create an innovation lab, or is there some other way that you can do that? And I'm just looking at the time, we got about 2 more minutes. So if anybody wants to take that question, and then we're going to have to call it a wrap, I think.
It's a very big question, talking to cities, you can see that they don't, let's say they don't have an innovation office, let alone a mobility innovation office. So these things just happen sometimes very ad hoc, and it's a challenge at city level as well. Like, okay, how do we continuously be open and can we adapt to innovation? So I'm not sure cities always have that capacity.
Mm. So this is coming back again to needing that support somehow from somewhere else, whether it's the neutral platform, but it certainly doesn't make sense that it be repeated in individual cities. I guess that's probably one key point.
Yeah, because cities always complain about fragmentation of information and having to go to different types of platforms to gather all the information. They prefer to have one, let's say, a platform where they can gather that information. Of course, that's the ideal situation. The world is more complicated than that.
Yes, it is. Okay. I see that on my clock anyway, it's 5 o'clock. So in my time zone, I know we've got a couple of other ones here represented, but any final comments? Or maybe what I'll say, if there are not that, you have the link, and I'll also send you the link in an email. And you're more than welcome to add any extra comments you'd like to hear, or if you other sticky notes to sort of add or continue or build on what you've said. We'd be more than pleased to get those. So I'll send that to you right away afterwards. If there are no other words, I want to respect our time simply because I know that people plan back-to-back meetings.
Yes, we do.
Challenging as that is. Okay.
Yeah. So I also have to go. I just want to say it's a fun and a very useful exercise. So good luck with processing all of those inputs.
I'm just glad it's not my job.
Oh, okay.
Yannick gets to do this, but
okay.
Yeah, I said the same thing to him earlier. Because there are so many aspects of this, but we won't go into it now because it's a bit of an abrupt cut right now, but I'd just like to say thank you all for the input that you provided, and I'll send you the link, so if there's anything else you'd like to add, then you can do that directly onto the board. And otherwise, feel free to send us an email. We're happy to get input that way as well. Maybe we'll see some of you tomorrow. We have a recommendation session tomorrow morning. I think a couple people may be at, and also the wrap up tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock. So maybe we'll see you at one or the other of those. Otherwise, a big thank you for sharing your brains with us this afternoon or this morning, Carol. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
You.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Okay.